Welcome to Did You Know? Podcast, your host, Richard Utley, dedicated to the African American viewers. The program is aimed to celebrate African American culture and deal with the real and relevant topics that impact the everyday lives of the African American community through frank and insightful dialogue with local and national influencers. Every day, there is another horrible, discouraging news story, directly or indirectly, impacting African Americans. But we need to look at the shining stars in the galaxy of Black America. It is time to tell our story. Welcome to another Did You Know? I'm going to start off with a little quick music selection. Tell Martha, don't you moan? Ooh, Mary, tell Mother, don't you moan? Martha, don't you moan? Well, I wanted to start off with that to set the tone for tonight's program. I'm going to start off with, a lot of you probably don't know who Cedric Chavez was, and he had something, and I'm going to quote what he said. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. And you cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. That's where I'm going to kick this program off tonight. And I'm going to say this real clear to you. Black history. Nobody needs to teach our black history, and we don't need a month for black history. We don't need approval. And I've been telling you all this time, it's our responsibility to teach black history to our people and to everybody. So you see what's happening. You cannot erase history because history was there and it will continue to be there. But I really believe that we need to take the responsibility of starting our own history classes, start in the churches, in organizations, in the home, to share our legacy of history. Because you've been waiting for so long that you've been happy, because when I was in school, we didn't have much black history. And then we got black history and we got comfortable. And now you see it's going away almost. So I think it's our responsibility to do that. And as I shared with you before, I'm always going to bring some history things out because I think it's important. Because we have to remember, never forgetting what we went through. From Africa to the ocean to the shores here. What our forefathers have went through. And now it's more important that we as a people become much more stronger. We have to start to developing more economic development. We have to have a seat at the table, but we have to come to the table with some substance. So I've been telling you this all along, ever since I've had this program, and that's why I always call it Did You Know, to try to get you to think. But now guess what? We don't have a choice. We got to do a better job of what's going on around us. We don't have a choice. Some things that are affecting us and you're sitting back waiting. I don't know what you're waiting for. I don't know if you're waiting for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, because a lot of places that we have gone in the last 50 years is now going to be reworked. So first of all, I'm going to start with my little history class for you. I want you to tell me and tell your kids who's the first black U.S. Supreme Court judge. They need to know that. They need to know maybe who Angela Davis is. Maybe they need to know who Ralph Ellis is. Maybe they need to know who Matthew Henson is. Maybe you need to sit down and discuss the 24th Amendment. Maybe you need to look it up. Maybe you need to understand it. Maybe you need to figure out why there is the 24th Amendment. Those are the things I hope that we start doing, because I think we don't have a choice to do. I'm going to leave you with a definite word, and I hope that you look it up. Martial law. I want you to look up martial law. I want you to see what martial law is all about. I want you to see what martial law is about in America. I just want you to be prepared for no matter what, but I want you to be educated. You know, we see a lot of things going on now. You see that the White House is doing all these executive orders, talking about abolishing the Department of Ed. But if you really know, he really can't do that, because federal agencies cannot be abolished without the approval of Congress. You probably didn't know that. That's why it's important for you to do some of your research. I guess you know that economic disparity continues to widen. And so it's going to be up to us to start working on income and employment. We're going to have to start working on wealth disparities. We're going to have to start looking at savings and banking. We're going to have to start looking at credit and loan disparities and retirement readiness. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we ain't got no choice. We got to look out for ourselves. I've been telling you that all along. We ain't got no choice now. You see, elections do have consequences. You know, you look at the Pentagon, they decided that, you know, they have a press corps, and they decided they're going to say who can come and who can't. So they moved 3 chairs around and said NPR, NBC News, and the New York Times. They've changed up the seats on them. I'm going to bring up a point to you, and I hope that you think about it. They're talking about the end of EPA, environmental justice. I hope some of you out there realize where your neighborhood is. That's all I'm going to say. See where your neighborhood is. See where your grandparents grew up at. And you will find, thank God we had an EPA, because it would have helped you out. The other thing is, a lot of you didn't vote, didn't want to vote, didn't care, think everything gonna be all right. You gotta stay on top of things. Just like you stay on top of, you know it's the Super Bowl. You know who's playing. You know the entertainers' names. You know the songs they're playing. Well, let me tell you, things is gonna get rough. You better know more than sports and entertainment. We gotta get tough now. Tough love. We don't have a choice. Income voters, whoa, guess what? Benefits is going to be slashed. You know, there's a talk out there that those of you who are on Section 8, you know, Section 8 in public housing was always supposed to be a temporary stopgap. You're supposed to be there and move on. Now we know generations and generations have lived in public housing. How do I know that? I know that for a fact because I sat on the Harrisburg Housing Authority for almost 17 years. It's supposed to be a stopgap. Well, now they're talking about only letting you be on Section 8 for 2 years, and then after 2 years you got to get off. What you going to do? Where you going to go? So you got to plan for these things now. So I'm asking my audience, please stay on top of what's going on. Not only national, but we have to stay on top of what's going on locally and statewide. I don't think we have a choice. I think it's our responsibility. And I've been telling you for a long time, if you don't look out for yourself, then shame on you. And I'll just give you two more things before I bring my guest on. I was reading today that the NFL is talking about moving it at the ends of the thing. They had little sayings. One said end racism, something said something else. But I understand they're talking about changing it for this Super Bowl. Choose love, and it takes all of us. That's the rumor I hear. They're not going to have, end racism. And I understand that the NFL is saying they are still very, they're still concerned about things that are going on. I don't think you have a choice, NFL, because the bulk of your players are people of color, and it affects them. As long as they got that football helmet on and that suit on, they're okay. But when they get in their cars and they drive out, they may not know that they're football players or basketball players, but yet we support everything, but who supports us? I just want you to think about it. And I'm not even bringing up the fact that all of a sudden, the President of the United States is going to be at the Super Bowl. I'm just asking. My program's called Did You Know? So the point is for you to do your research and get your own mind and your own reflections of what you think, what's going on. I said this the other day in my last program. When I was growing up, I was always told, be careful what you do. You're responsible for your actions. And we were always believed in law and order. And we've seen some things change here in the last few weeks. I just want you to think of something else. As I was growing up, I was often heard people say, we'd have to take it to the Supreme Court. That was because the thinking was that the Supreme Court was the final place of our leaders could go to seek justice, especially for human rights. All I want you to do is think about it. Do you have the same belief in the Supreme Court that we have been preaching all our lives, our forefathers to us, and we to our kids and grandkids? My point is this here. We have to support people who's going to support us. And those who's not going to support us, we have to be heard. So all I'm asking tonight is this here. As much energy that we spend on sports, much energy we spend on entertainment, how much energy that we spend on so many things, let's now spend some energy on where we're going and how we're going to get there. Thank you. Well, boy, I guess that was a good one tonight, huh? And the reason I did this because I'm passionate about it. And I'm going to stay passionate. Because the reason I bring that up is because the guest I'm going to bring on next. And the person I'm going to bring on next is going to put it in perspective for you. But listen to this song, and then I'm going to bring my guest on. Who's my guest today? I've done played that song for you, and you're probably wondering, why am I playing that song? Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And tonight I have the privilege and the honor have Merrick Green on. He's the executive director of the Martin Luther King Leadership Development Institution. And we're going to have a good, candid conversation tonight because I think it's very appropriate. We just celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of that, I'd like for him to tell you who he is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Utley. So my name is Merrick Green. I am the executive director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Development Institute here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I come to you by way of New Orleans, Louisiana, where I was born and raised. I went to college in Baton Rouge at LSU, and then I joined the Air. I spent 23 years in the Air Force, literally traveling around the world, and I ended up back here in Harrisburg because this is where my wife is from and her family's still here. So we call Harrisburg home now.
Okay. Since you are head of the Institute, let me just start out with this way. What would you think that the importance of supporting Martin Luther King's birthday?
So like you talked about earlier, understanding our history is important. Spending time in our history is important, and I think celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is important for us because I think we've gotten comfortable, like you said earlier, we've gotten comfortable with being comfortable in where the movement got us to be in 2025. And so I think reflection on how we got here is important because if we don't reflect on it, we may lose our way and forget essentially how we got here. And I think that reflection, that day, a couple of days, just understanding the legacy of Dr. King is so important because a lot of young people need to know.
Would you say that one of the things, and I realize, and you can ask me this, I'll answer this to you. When you say that Martin Luther King was an icon, we all knew who he was. Mm-hmm. He was a leader to us.
He was a leader.
Now I look at where we are, and I start to say who our leaders are. Whether I sit back and I could say Martin Luther King, I could say Malcolm X, I could say a number of people. There were many different philosophies out there, but we had a lot of leaders. Mm-hmm. You can name them off your fingers, whether it was Julian Bond or things of that. Don't you think it's important for we to go back and get information and understand what Martin Luther King stood for, because that will help us ground us to where we are now in the fight that we have to do?
Yeah, I agree. I think that what Dr. King did was the blueprint for being a part of a nonviolent movement that got the attention of the world. And it was able to take us from a place where segregation was rampant throughout this country and bring us to a place where we had to deal with the issues that were segregation and move us to a better place that we can call where we are now. And I think that understanding how he did it and how the movement was done is important even in these days and times because a lot of it is just repeating what was done before but in a different context and a different time frame now.
When you say that's why it's important to understand history, because when you understand history, a lot of times history repeats itself.
Oh, it does all the time. Yeah, history repeats itself, and they say that you have to learn these lessons so you don't repeat them, right? So we don't want to repeat the lessons of the past, and we want to use the lessons from the past to get us to where we want to be in our future.
I think what you said is very important, and one of the groups I use is a lot of times is that in the Jewish faith, they talk about the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. They tell their young ones as they grow up about the Holocaust because they don't want anybody to forget and they don't want it to happen again.
Yep, yeah, that's true.
So I think that what we have to do is start doing the same thing. We have to tell people who Martin Luther King was and tell them why it was very important that his legacy was there and why we need to have new Martin Luther Kings.
Yes.
The issue I have right now, and I question myself in my own way, is leadership. Leadership in terms of who we are and who speaks for us.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people get confused because they think one person speaks for it, but like I said, there was many. Whether it was Martin Luther King, whether it was Julian Bond, whether it was Malcolm X, whether now you look at Ron, you can look at many people now. You can look at Al Sharpton. You can look at Minister Farrakhan. You can look at a number of groups of people. But I think that what you said earlier is that it's most important that we start to give credit and honor to people like Martin Luther King, and stop having people think that Martin Luther King is just that one day that you're off.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
Because technically, Martin Luther King values and what he believed in should have been a 24/7, 365 days.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think what we should do? What do you think we should do as far as Martin Luther King is concerned to get people out there to understand the importance? Because if you go back, and people do, if you take John Lewis was a person, or Jesse Jackson, they all came up through that nonviolence, work your way so that we can get the results that we are.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think that we gotta get back and bring that old song out, We Shall Overcome?
Yeah, we got to keep singing that song. And I think the other thing that we need to do is that we need to train leaders, right? And so one of the things that I do, my position in the MLK Leadership Development Institute as an executive director, is that we are training leaders not only in the city of Harrisburg, but literally nationwide. So we have about 35 people in our cohort right now, and they're scattered about through Pennsylvania, some in different states. I mean, last class we had a gentleman from California. And so I think you have to be intentional, you have to be deliberate about how you train leaders. And I know that when Dr. King was doing the movement, I know in the back of his mind, the people that were around him were ready to fill in the space and go places where Dr. King couldn't go and carry the message. And he was constantly training those John Lewises, those Jesse Jacksons, those leaders that were going to follow after him to do the job that he was doing. And I think that sometimes in leadership positions, we get so caught up in being in charge that we forget to train the replacement of the person next to us, not realizing that we won't always be here. We won't always have an opportunity to be here.
So you're saying that Martin Luther King Leadership Institute is one of their major is to train people to step up to the plate.
Step up to the plate in whatever organization they're in. So we have people from different organizations in the MLK Leadership Development Institute, and that is the goal, is that we put them through self-reflective exercises that they allow them to kind of look within to see what type of leader they are. And then we put them in situations where they are able to lead other people to see what type of leader they are and a follower they are when they're not supposed to be in charge or they're not in charge. Because one of the best things about leadership is that sometimes you have to be a follower. You can't always be in charge, or you won't always be asked to be in charge, because there'll be other leaders that you come in contact with, and somebody might have to take the mantle and move forward. So, being a leader also means being a follower.
So when you say that to my audience, you're telling them that we need to develop leaders, and you, the institute, that's what you're doing.
That's what we're doing.
You're developing leaders now.
We're developing leaders now.
And I think that's very important, because a lot of times people don't know that leadership is a very interesting thing. Some people are born leaders, and some people are probably born leaders but don't want to be leaders. And there's some that want to be leaders, should not be leaders. So when I say that to you, what would you tell my audience that they should look at themselves in the mirror to see what direction they want to go in? I know that's a pretty hypothetical thing, but I just want you to, because there's people out there, I think they could did it, but they've never really given it a thought.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that you have to ask yourself is, what is your leadership style? And a leader that knows their leadership style will be able to answer that question probably within a minute. But if you have to think about it and close your eyes and try to figure out what kind of leader you are, then maybe you haven't developed it yet. And I think that that's where reading is important. Interacting with people on different committees and different social places in life is important, because you'll find an opportunity to be a part of something where the leadership traits inside of you may pop out, or you may get an opportunity because somebody didn't show up for a meeting and we need somebody to fill in, and now is your opportunity to get your shine on and get your leadership opportunity.
Now, the Institute has been out there for quite a while.
2008.
It was started with the concept that, not only that, but I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you bridge all kinds of people.
All kinds of people.
Could you explain to them, it's just not because sometimes the audience gets hung up because my program is whatever. I have all kinds of people listen to my program.
Yeah, so Joe Robinson is the originator, one of the first presidents of the MLK Leadership Development Institute. And the quote that he always uses is that he says that you could have a PhD or a GED. You could be Christian, Muslim, Jewish. It doesn't really matter your race, your ethnicity, your religion. What we want is a group of people that are like-minded to come together with the intent that they want to better themselves and to better their community. And so what you get is a mosaic of people in this course that come from all different walks of life. Some have PhDs, some have GEDs, some are retired, some are just starting their careers. But what it happens is, it's kind of like an experiment almost in a petri dish, where all these people come together and they share these ideas, and they share their ideas and their thoughts with one another, and a perception that someone may have had about somebody from a different faith or a different race may be overcome, because now you're actually able to have a conversation with someone about a misconception or a perceived bias that you may or may not know you've had. And so in this class of 35 people from January to June, we go through a lot of these things and a lot of these exercises, and we work through these things with people, and you come out a better person from being in this institute.
Because would you say that what you're doing is super important, especially now?
It is very important now, and more than ever, we need to communicate with one another, and that our biases are our worst enemies. And so I always tell people that just sitting down with somebody and having a conversation will open up a door or turn on a light that you may or may not known was there. But because you may have to get over your own fears or your own assumptions about people, you don't want to open that door. But I think it's important now more than ever that we talk to one another, not only to tell each other how we feel, but maybe about what we need. You might need some eggs. And it's, egg prices are going up. So if you don't say anything about your needs, then they may not get met. And I think this course is one of those places where if somebody has a question about somebody of a different faith or a different race or something, that they can't just walk up to somebody on the street and ask because it's not a comfortable conversation, that we can do these types of things in the MLK Leadership Development Institute. And then out of it, you become a better person. You have a better understanding of other people, which is important, because right now we just need to be able to understand one another.
I mean, I think the other part of that's important because people have watched TV, they've judged us or judged whoever based on what they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why I have this program. That's the reason why you have your program, because we want everybody to find out everybody is not a gangster. Everybody is not a thief. There are those who can read. There are those that can write. And so sometimes what happens is they've been exposed to negativeness for whatever reason, and they really go to believe that's the way it is. I mean, even to the point that I was so upset the other day with the whole plane and the helicopter that crashed, and had the president say, blame it on basically affirmative action.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. But then you had people believe maybe that's really true. It's not the case, but that's why it's important for us to speak and talk to people. Because I've even been in a situation where people have said to me, "Oh, I did not know that you were educated that way, or you went here, or you did this. I mean, you went to LSU. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. Ha ha, we graduated, by the way." To show people that what was important is that we just want to be a part of the mainstream, but we need the opportunity. And that's why sometimes people understand. Affirmative action was not to give somebody a job they couldn't do the job. I'm sorry to tell you. It was trying to help equal the playing field. But that is all, it was blown out of proportion. People misunderstood it. And so your job, you're saying, is that you believe your institution is to help people build together, understand, and come together, and to go out and promote. Because I guess, based on what I know of your organization, you have many people from many companies and institutions that come to your program with the idea that it will better help the companies that they work for. Am I right or wrong?
That's right. And I think one of the biggest things about the Institute is the network. So I tell people all the time, the network of people that you will make and meet in the institution is invaluable. And so, my story is, as I moved to Harrisburg in 2021, I think I was a member of the Institute in 2022. And the fact that I met Joe Robinson during that time frame has helped me tremendously as I navigate the city of Harrisburg and all the social and community circles that I'm in now. And had I not met Joe Robinson and had I not been a part of the Institute, it might have taken me a year or two longer, but I was able to jumpstart all of that and meet a whole group of people that was willing to help me. And the thing that we all had in common was that we all graduated from the Institute. And because I'm in a fraternity, and I can explain to you how, being in an organization with like-minded people is important, because it makes the time to act a lot faster, because we all know where we stand and what we believe in. And so nowadays, I will go through the city of Harrisburg, and I have my MLK LDI pins that I carry with me when I meet new people to me that are alumni of the Institute. But they're in some very influential places in the city of Harrisburg. And, we recently just did the MLK Day of Service, and we were able to accomplish a lot because of a lot of the people that we're talking to were past graduates of the Institute. So it's always great to meet those people in and around the city.
Even though you're Harrisburg, you see the Martin Luther King Institute as being a model for this country?
I do see it as being a model for this country. And like I said it earlier, we really just need to sit down and talk to one another. And when we get to learn a little bit more about each other, our biases go away. You start to realize that we all have, the same things in common, right? We want to live in nice cities, and we want to have peaceful residences and neighborhoods and communities, and we want to watch our kids grow up and not have to worry about crime or murder or guns or violence, and just, live a nice, peaceful, healthy life. At the end of the day, I think that's what everybody really wants. And then once you sit down and start having conversations with people about that, you'll find that you have more in common than you thought you didn't have in common. But it all starts with a conversation. And if we're not talking to one another, then we're just misunderstanding one another and basing it on feelings, not actual facts.
I think that's important what you just said, because unfortunately, sometimes things have been painted that's not necessarily true about our community.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to live in a safe neighborhood. We all want to abide by the law. I get upset sometimes, and I tell my community you're somewhat responsible, because we are law-abiding citizens, and we have a responsibility that I get upset sometimes when I hear older people say they're scared to come out their house after 6 o'clock. I know that for a fact because my father expressed that. Mm-hmm. When living in Pittsburgh, in the Homewood area, he was concerned, and many of them was concerned. And so I think we have a responsibility, but I think it's important for us to tell our story, because unfortunately, if you go back to the movies, if you go back to what we were exposed to, we were always gangsters, we were always pimps, we were always negative. It wasn't positive. And what you're doing is positive. And so I want to commend you on the things that that the institution is doing, because would you say that is what Martin Luther King was about?
He was about the beloved community. And if you're not familiar with it, I would highly suggest you do a little bit of research on what the beloved community was and how Dr. King imagined what our communities would be like in this idea of beloved. And I think that, eventually we could get there, but it's going to take a lot of people educating themselves, right? So earlier you talked about listening to what the news says or listening to what the internet says. And I highly suggest that you do your own research and you do your own reading and educate your mind with information and not let people, with a filter tell you what you should think. And a lot of times that's what's happening. Human beings are naturally lazy. We want the easiest way to do something, the fastest way to do something, especially in this age we live in now. We want TikTok to tell us what we should think. And that is very dangerous, because TikTok will tell you what they want you to think so they can sell ads and get you to buy the latest thing, because we live in a consumer economy. But if you take the time to go research on your own, go read on your own, and educate yourself about the issues, about the things that are happening around you, I guarantee you it'll start to change the way you think and it'll change your viewpoints. And then also surround yourself with people that are inquisitive just like you and asking the same questions. And you'll all come to that same opinion and that aha moment together. But it's important that you educate yourself.
I would admit that if you would have told me that we would be where we are at this present moment, I would have probably told you you're crazy. But we are at this moment. So now we got to go back and look at some of those road maps that got us to where we got to. And I use the word the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And the reason I use the last 50 years because I can relate to the 50 years. And the key is we don't want to go back. The concept is we wanted to grow.
Yep.
So if we wanted to grow, we got to be smarter and wiser. And so now the responsibility is that we can no longer use the word ignorance. There's too many vehicles out there, would you say, to help us so that we don't have to be ignorant. As I said earlier, we can read. Remember, before way back, half of you don't want to read now, but way back when we were first on the plantation, we were taught not to read. Nobody wanted us to read. Nobody wanted you to read and write. And then you got the privilege to read and write, and it's our responsibility to take more advantage of now than we did before. Mm-hmm. That's number one. Voting. We wanted to vote, but we couldn't vote. But then when we got the right to vote, then we said, we took it for granted. One of the things I realized in my life at this point, we took a lot of things for granted, and we just thought it was just going to continue that way. Now we find out that we can't do that. We can build, but we have to build together. I'm hoping that this will bring us, as a people, more together, as well as understanding there's a lot of things out there that's important that we got to keep our eye on. Mm-hmm. I've been saying it all along. I've been telling my audience for months and years, you need to understand who's going to be the judge. You need to understand who's going to be the district justice. You need to understand who's going to be the constables. You need to understand who's going to educate your children. And we've let everybody else do it. But now, would you agree, we don't have any choice now?
We don't. And one of the things the Institute teaches is a great exercise about basically who is your representative. And I mean, not representative being in the state house, but from the bottom all the way up. Who's your representative in your township? Who's the representative in the city hall for you? and understanding who those people are and being able to influence them with what matters to you and what matters to your community, because they will clearly make the laws and make the rules without you, but if you voice your opinion, then you might be heard. And if you voice your opinion with enough people, you definitely will be heard, which is what that whole civil rights movement was about, because they didn't stand, I gave this analogy today. If you're trying to push a rock, multiple people are trying to push a rock and they all get on one side of the rock and push, the rock goes nowhere. But if everybody gets on one side of the rock and they all push together, it might move. And I think that's where we need to be, is we need to be all on the same side. We need to be pushing this rock for what we want to make sure that our civil rights aren't taken away, which we work so hard for. And like you talked about, I think about voting a lot. And, I think about in the time that we talk about the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, this wasn't 100 years ago or 200 years ago. This is less than 100 years ago that we were fighting for the right to vote. And like you said, here it is, we're taking it for granted, which we shouldn't. We should be showing up every time, because that's what the ancestors fought for. That's what they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for. That's what they did all of these things for. And I think, like I said before, we've gotten comfortable because my generation hasn't had to do it. And I remember as a kid growing up and having to protest, things in the city of New Orleans that I had no idea about until I became an adult and understood why it was important for me to be out there voicing my opinion. But it was instilled in me at a young age to learn the system and make sure that the system was working for me and not against me. And I think, like you said earlier, we need to teach our kids this. We need to make sure they know our history and they know their history, and that they stay on top of it, because you don't want to forget it, because it will repeat itself, and we'll be wondering, how did we get here, reading a history book about, wait, wasn't it like this 100 years ago? How did we end up back here again?
Answer this question for me. As I was sitting here thinking, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of young people about the plight of America, plight of African Americans. And I get upset sometimes because they do not see, or did not see, the relevance of past history.
Mm-hmm.
I've been told by some that was a long time ago, or it's not relevant now. It's saying all that. How do you feel about that?
I think it's still relevant. They say every generation has its cause, and maybe this generation hasn't found theirs. But, at the pace we're going, it may show up sooner rather than later. And they may find their cause is to fight for the rights that were taken from them because they weren't paying attention and were falling asleep, right? And so what's the definite, the opposite of sleep is woke. So, if you stay awake and you keep your eyes open and you're watching what's happening around you, you'll pay attention and you won't let it happen again. So it is relevant. I believe it's still relevant, but you have to be engaged, and you have to not let all of the distractions around you, the shiny things that the world puts in front of you, that America puts in front of you, distract you from what's important. And right now, what's important is making sure that we can take care of our families. We live in good communities. And that we're all able to be successful and progress in life the way we want to.
I think that's important. What you said is that's where we are, and I think we now don't have a choice, because too many people struggled for us,
Mm-hmm.
and and I think that's why I'm glad that you're on today, because people forget about Martin Luther King.
They do.
And I'm glad that you're on today. Yeah, they knew they had a day off. And because they had a day off, but the legacy, could you explain the legacy of not only Martin Luther King, but I could talk about a number of people, the legacy, why it's so important to understand the legacy?
The legacy is important because it is a rich legacy. There aren't a whole lot of there are no other real civil rights leaders that have a day to commemorate the work that they did for this country. And it wasn't just for African American people. It was for everybody that was feeling a sense of injustice in America. And so I think the quote goes, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so we want to make sure that the legacy lives on, that people understand the history. I mean, we celebrate the most random things in this country. I mean, just think about, Valentine's Day is coming up, right? And so everybody's going to go all out of their way for Valentine's Day. Not to, to trash on Valentine's Day, but if you think about it, like, we're brought up not even really understanding the true meaning of the holiday, but we commercialize it so much that it just becomes a part of the fabric of our society. So without even thinking about it, how much trouble do you get in on Valentine's Day if you don't get your wife or your significant other a gift, right? It's like a whole emotional event because it's Valentine's Day, and that's just kind of the way we are in this country. But I feel like these things and this legacy should be something that we revere, that we celebrate, that we honor, because it put us in the place that we're in today.
What are some of the ways that people can get to know the information about your Martin Luther King Leadership Program? But I want to carry it a little step further. Not only here, but as I shared earlier, I think it should be a blueprint. So how could people, not only here, I have people that listen to this program other than in Harrisburg, because I think the blueprint and the concept is so greatly needed. I thought it always was needed, but I think it's needed more now. So please tell my audience who you are, where you are, how they can get involved in you, and how we can take this blueprint another step.
Okay. So the way that you can learn more about the MLK Leadership Development Institute is just go to our website, mlkldi.org. It's mlkldi.org. And on our website, you can learn all about the Institute. We just started our 2025 cohort. So normally the cohort runs from January to about the end of June, and we have a graduation in June with a commencement ceremony. We bring in a guest speaker, and we have the students all get together for one time, and then they go across the stage. But in that time, we basically meet every Friday from 9 to 11 o'clock, and we have our lead facilitator, which is Mr. Keith Ellison, that is going to facilitate each one of these classes. Yep, that's it right there on the screen. And Keith is on the far right-hand side of the screen. You'll see his picture everywhere. And, of course, Joe Robinson. And the picture I have on the screen now is our last cohort. There are a lot of people in Harrisburg that you might run into that if you talk to them about the MLK Leadership Development Institute, they'll tell you they were a member of it. I think we've graduated over 250 students from the cohort. They range from, there's a senator, there is a Pennsylvania senator, Pennsylvania House of Representatives, people that work for the city, people that work for PHRC. There are a lot of people that come through the cohort, and the goal is that they go through, they take what we teach them, they apply it into their jobs, they apply it to the organizations that they're a part of, and then they also tell somebody else about it, and then that's how we grow the Institute and we get people to come back into it. And like I mentioned before, we're just not limited to Harrisburg. We have people as far as California. We've had people even in India attend the class, and then we've also had people in Pittsburgh and Philly. But we are wide open when it comes to the organization and the institute, and we're always looking for new and different people to be a part of it, to have this experience with us. And trust me, it'll be experience like no other leadership experience you've ever had before.
Let me ask you this question. How do you think that we should, based on your knowledge and all the people that you've had in your institution, how do you think that we should start developing people to even consider to want to go that route? We talk about, if I ask somebody about basketball, if I ask somebody about football, if I ask them about a sport, or I have kids that will tell me they want to be rappers or they want to be that. How can we get a way to get people more involved and active in these other leadership kinds of things or directions that we need to be in?
So I think you have to give people opportunities to lead. And in order to do that, that means that people have to be a part of something other than themselves. I joke about it all the time that, at least my daughter jokes with me about it. So when I was in the Air Force, I did one thing for 23 years. I was in the Air Force. That's all I did 24/7 for 23 years. And when I got out of the Air Force, I realized that I had a whole lot more opportunity to do a whole lot of other things that I wanted to do, which is why I became, joined the Institute. I do this stuff with my fraternity. I'm on the board of a couple of boards here in Harrisburg because I feel like I have a lot to offer based on my experiences. But one of the things that, back to your question about how do people get involved, is like you have to be willing to be led and you have to want to lead. So be, willing to be led and you have to want to lead. And if you have that fire inside you, that, for whatever the reason is to make your community better, it's to be on the PTA at your child's school, or to be a community activist, or, in a business. But you have to have that fire inside you to want to do it because, like they said, you can't make you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it, right? Stick their head in there. If they're thirsty, they'll drink. But if they're not, they'll just put their face in the water. And so I think people have to be, they got to have the fire inside of them to want to lead and to be led. And it's not all about, just being a leader all the time, because sometimes it's okay to take the back seat and sit in the back of the room and just offer advice to other people, or, listen to that leader give you direction and where you need to be.
I think that's important what you said, because there are, and I'm not just saying, there's coaches out there, there's ministers out there, there's so many of you out there. I think now we have to take the responsibility that you got to start to teach. I think in sports, because I played sports, I think, yes, it gave me a foundation. Yes, it let me know that I had to play with a group. Mm-hmm. It let me know that it took, like they always say, it takes a village.
Yep.
So we now understand all that. So if I had to ask you to give me in the next 5 minutes, what are the things that you think we definitely need to do based on the philosophy of two people, Martin Luther King? I'm gonna give you 3. Martin Luther King, and I'm gonna tie Malcolm into it as well because they all in a word, and you.
All right. So I'm gonna quote the past guest speaker at the MLK Leadership Development Institute was Pastor Larry Walthour from Shiloh Baptist Church in York. Shout out Pastor Walthour in York. So one of the things that he instilled in everybody, and this was him giving the message of Dr. King on how we should approach problems and how we should deal with issues that we have day to day. And it's a 4-step process. And the first step is to investigate. So I talked about this earlier in the conversation, is that investigating. That means do your research, read. Don't listen to the first thing that comes across your Facebook feed or the first news article that you read and react to it. Investigate on your own and figure stuff out for yourself before you decide that you are going to disagree with something or someone. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to negotiate. So if your investigation leads you down the path that you disagree with somebody and you need to work it out, then you might not get everything that you want, and you might have to negotiate that issue or that thing with somebody so that they can get part of what they want and you can get part of what you want, because sometimes getting your way or getting what you want all the time may not be the case. And then if the negotiations don't work your way and then you feel like you have to move a couple steps further, what you want to do is meditate. And so whatever your religion is going to be or whatever your faith is you want to go and you want to take some time before you move to the last step, and you want to just meditate and just kind of sit with that problem or sit with that situation before you just react to it. And a lot of times, human beings are emotional, and I have a whole nother conversation about emotions and chemicals in our body. We can get into that next time. But you want to meditate on it before you do the last step, which was take direct action. And so when you get to the last step, you've gone through 3 iterations or 3 steps before that. And this was the thing that Pastor Walthour talked about, how Dr. King approached problems. And I'm sure that Malcolm X would have looked at it similarly too. And I thought about this on the way over here. The most powerful scene in the movie Malcolm X is when, remember when they were in the jail and he was trying to get the guy out of the jail?
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, and he snapped his fingers and everybody moved, right? And so I think the people that witnessed that, without saying anything or without him actually doing anything, witnessed the power of one man being in charge and leading people, and it got them to change their mind or change the direction of something that they were going to do. And it wasn't a violent act. It was just them being in sync with one another and moving together, and then kind of bringing me back to my earlier comment about moving the rock, right? The rock got moved because everybody was pushing in the same direction. And so when I think about my philosophy and things that I like to think about is that if we as a community move in the same direction and move at the same time, and we move in the same cadence, it's like listening to a symphony, right? If you go to the orchestra and you listen to the symphony, the conductor's conducting and the music is beautiful and it's all the way it's supposed to be, and you know everybody's playing on beat. But if you take that same sheet of music, or you tell everybody to start at a different time and show up at a different part in the music, it's chaos and it doesn't sound good and nobody wants to hear it. And so my philosophy is that, you know, you have to want to, you know, you have to lead, and you have to want to be led at the same time. And there's nothing wrong with that, but just know when it's your time to step up. If you are a leader, you have to step up and be ready to take that position.
Okay, time is flying, so do you have anything else you would like to tell my audience?
No, I just want to say thank you for letting me come on the platform. I appreciate it. I joked about, you know, coming down here today because, like, I've been past here a couple of times but didn't know all of this existed. And as I go through my discovery tour of Harrisburg and I learn more and more about this city and about the state of Pennsylvania, I'm just happy to be here, and I'm happy that you have shows like this educating people and letting them listen and ask them, did you know? And providing them with some information to help them educate themselves, to make them more aware of what's happening around them so they can be prepared for what's next and they're not caught off guard with any surprises.
Well, I'm glad that you came on the program. I think the program is a very important program. And I'm going to close the program. Will you please give them how to reach you again?
Okay, so you can find the MLK Leadership Development Institute online at mlkldi.org. So it's just mlkldi.org. And all the information about the Institute is there. You can fill out a contact form if you're interested in a future cohort. There's a form for that. And just reach out to me. I'm Merrick Green, the Executive Director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Development Institute.
All right, well, I'm going to leave you with that. And we're going to leave you with that song that we started with him with. Please think about this song. Thank you and good night, and we'll see you again.
On the Voice 17104. We will be here on the Voice 17104 every first and third Tuesday from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Once again, thanks for viewing.